Welcome to another episode of Culturally and Technically Legal, the show where we examine the intersections of culture, law, and technology. Today, we have a very, very special guest, Mr. Chuck Hayward. Chuck Hayward is a television and film writer. He has been a writer for some of the classic films and TV shows that many of us have grown to love, including Dear White People, WandaVision, Ted Lasso, Step Sisters, and many others. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mr. Chuck Hayward to Culturally and Technically Legal. How you doing today, Chuck?
I'm doing well, sir. How are you?
Doing amazing. We're so happy to have you here. Definitely been one of the favorite conversations that I've been wanting to have, and I know I've been reaching out to you like I gotta have this conversation, gotta have this conversation. So thank you so much. We're thrilled to have you. We're going to jump into the conversation, and if you can just provide the audience a little bit of a background about who you are and how you got into this, film writing and TV writing industry.
I went to Syracuse and majored in TV, radio, and film. So I sort of always knew I wanted to. At first, I thought I wanted to be a director, but then I was writing the stuff I was directing, and then that became more my focus. And once I graduated, moved out here to LA, and a friend got me an interview with a woman who was another Syracuse alum who worked at Forrest Whitaker's old production company. So then I became her assistant, and then from there, I spent the next 8 or 9 years being an assistant in various other places, production companies, a couple television shows. I was an assistant on Everybody Hates Chris, on Entourage. I worked as an assistant in HBO Business Affairs. And while I was doing all this, I was, writing and networking my butt off. Anytime I would meet other assistants, we'd go out for a drink and try to like see what each other's goals were in our career. Made a lot of friends that way, and also made a lot of contacts who were able to then help me professionally, get me jobs, get me representation, all that kind of stuff. So it was just kind of like banding together with all the colleagues in my quote unquote class, meaning like we started the industry at the same time, and kind of all just letting the high tide lift all boats when we can. So and it took about, like I said, 9 years of assistanting before I finally started getting paid to write. And then it was another 4 years or so before I actually was able to get consistent writing work, or on a show that went more than one season. And since then it's been relatively smooth. The writer's strike this last year obviously threw a huge wrench in the works, but we're starting to recover from that now.
Wow, that's such a loaded response. I think when I think about writers, I think about you guys being almost just like inventors with this great imagination. Because a lot of stuff we see on TV is literally coming from you all, or not even just TV anymore, because there's multiple platforms in which people engage within these various mediums or sitcoms or whatever you like. It's coming from a writer, and you can really grasp it on any platform, from social media to TV, to just the list goes on. Within that, there's always this, I guess, idea or this lingering thought of, IP rights, right? Because like I said, it is stuff that you guys are creating. It's coming from your imagination, your hard work, information you've gathered. In this digital age, can you talk a little bit about how your IP rights are actually being protected, and not only protected, but being enforced? Because we see all the time there are copyright, infringement issues here, or social platforms. People are taking people's information and spreading it. So could you talk a little bit about, how you are protecting and what ways you're enforcing your IP in this space?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways. Usually, when you write a script, you can just kind of very easily upload it to the Writers Guild of America website, and then they will give you like a registration number that's good for, oh God, I haven't done this in a while. I think it's like 5 years or something like that, where you hold the copyright over it. That allows you to send it out to people who would potentially want to make it, and it protects you because there's a record of you having entered this thing at a certain date. Then they have what's called the poor man's copyright, which is you write a script, you mail it to yourself. And so that it has like a postmark stamp on it, and then you don't open it, so that if anything ever comes up where it feels like your work has been stolen, you have this as a marker of it having been issued at a certain time. And it very rarely, like you hear a few cases of people say, suing because like this movie that came out and was really successful. Oh, I wrote something very similar to and sent it to that production company. Um, that when that does happen, yeah, obviously there's recourse. But it's harder because a lot of the companies are backed by studios. They have deeper pockets than your average aspiring writer. So it is very difficult to mount a case. So you really have to just sort of be protective of where you send your work. Now, there's other people who are really anxious about even discussing something that they're working on because they don't want it to get stolen. That happens a lot less frequently. So I encourage people like to not be so secretive that it feels, that you can't actually share with anybody what you're working on, because you really do want to let people know what your interests are in terms of what you write about, what stuff you want to put out into the world. So it does help to be able to talk about that to some degree of depth. And then it becomes difficult too when you're trying to get studios or some even sometimes managers and agents to read your material, because they don't accept unsolicited material. So like, and it's for that legal reason, so that you can't, like, if you send them a script to a studio unsolicited, and then they make a movie that is similar to your script, then that you can sue them for copyright infringement or for stealing your IP. So they don't take any scripts from people that aren't solicited, that they don't solicit themselves, or that don't come through agents, managers, or lawyers. So that's the studios and those people safeguarding themselves from liability by having kind of like a licensed third party, and that being an agent, manager, or lawyer.
You talked a deal about various studios, working studios, production teams, managers, agents, and all these different people within this industry. Could you shed a little bit of light for the audience about option agreements and expressions of interest, and really just take us through the importance of those? And in this day and time, are these still necessary?
So option agreements are, there's a couple different ways that can work. So you as a writer would option, like, say you're trying to write somebody's life story or something that happened to a real person who exists. You would approach that person and option their life rights for a certain period of time and a certain period of money. Let's say you'll give them $5,000 for a 2-year period, and you have that 2-year period to make that story, or else they have to or else the rights will revert back to the person who you're trying to write about, or you go back to the person and say, hey, I couldn't get it made in two years. Here's another $5,000 for another 2 years of me to try to get it made. So that's one direction that a option agreement can work in. Also, if there's an independent producer who reads a script of yours and they like it, then they will do it's an option agreement, but it's called more like a shopping agreement, which is the same exact thing. Like they'll have your script and they'll say, hey, we retain the rights to like sell this thing. You can't let anybody else sell it for 2 years or whatever. And sometimes they pay you a couple $1,000s for it. Sometimes they don't. It kind of depends on the how much money that producer has on hand to do stuff like that, and also how confident they are that they'll be able to sell that piece of work of yours. So yeah, there's all sorts of things built in to make sure that nobody gets screwed, and it usually works pretty well.
Yeah. Wow. No, that's good to hear. And I know you had mentioned a little bit ago, about the strike and that happened over from I think July of 2023 to November 2023, the SAG-AFTRA strike, right? Essentially, this was a strike between a labor dispute, I should say, with the Alliance of Motion Pictures and Television and Producers, and SAG-AFTRA, which was the Screen Actors Guild for American Federation of Television, Radio, and Radio Artists. Sorry. What was the effects of this on the industry? And did you see any personal effects of this strike and this labor dispute as a whole on yourself?
Yeah, well, that was only half. The SAG-AFTRA strike was only half of the strike. The other one was the Writers Guild strike, which started first. That started, I believe, May 1st, and ended on September 24th. So there was overlap there. We writers were on strike for was that May, June, 2 months before the actors, and the actors came on. We were striking together. So there a lot of solidarity
Wow.
between those two unions. And I think, and so here's the thing: when the writer strike was, when it was just the writer strike happening, those 2 months, actors were still able to work. Like you could still shoot things, you could still, star in things, that kind of stuff. Once the actors went on strike, the industry shut down completely. Like nobody could make anything because no writers and no actors. And so what the nature of that labor dispute was that our residuals, a lot of things were being, uh, a lot of people were finding it harder to make a living because of the way that the industry was changing. So, old model where there were, just a couple of broadcast networks, usually a show would last, 22 episodes per season. So you as a writer would be employed for pretty much like, 45 weeks out of the year. And same, with the actors would be probably, 20 or 30 weeks out of the year, something like that. And then with the advent of streaming, orders became lower, budgets became lower, and residual payments became lower or non-existent,
Yeah.
as it were. And that's just because as the studio, this is what they say, as the studios were trying
Right.
to figure out what the business model was, they weren't trying to like do a whole lot of extra profit sharing in terms of residuals. So we kind of got screwed there. And residuals used to be a very big part of how we were able to maintain our livelihoods, because we're independent contractors. We can sometimes go a year without work or longer without work. So
Wow.
those residuals, or what we call mailbox money, those things are able to to keep us afloat during those leaner times. So that's the basis of what we were striking about. And I mean, there's a ton of other little minutia that we were arguing about that it doesn't, for the purpose of your question, doesn't make sense to go into.
Yep.
But yeah, it affected everybody, and sort of the rhetoric that was coming out of the studios at the time during the strike was really like, I don't want to say hurtful, because that just sounds like it sounds like I'm underplaying it. It was actually like inhumane. Some of the heads of these studios who we were striking against were saying like, oh, we're just going to wait it out, like, and once people start to lose their homes, then
Wow.
they'll come to their senses and they'll end this strike and we can all get back to work, that kind of thing. So when you have people at the top who are that kind of heartless, it really, I don't know, man, it really, for me, it showed how greed based our industry is. Not like that was a huge surprise, but again, just the inhumanity of that was a bit of a surprise. And it just kind of like it restructured the way we saw this industry, and how the people we make rich, how they look at us. And it's kind of like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it was kind of a mind fuck in a way that like, I'm still kind of recovering from. That's the emotional part of it. And the
Yeah.
business part of it is we weren't able to make money for half of last year. And which sounds like it's not the worst thing in the world, but leading up to the strike, people suspected that there would be a strike. So networks weren't ordering things, they weren't ordering projects, they weren't starting writers' rooms, they weren't doing all that stuff, because they were like, we're just going to have to stop in the middle, so let's not do it. So the slowdown in work productivity came at the beginning of 2023. And then after the writer strike ended, I'm sorry, after the actor strike ended in November, it was kind of like, the year's pretty much over at that point. So I thought that once the strikes were over, it would be like, boom, let's hit the ground running. The studios would be like, we need to buy, so that we can, fill in these gaps in programming that we have. And that didn't happen. Everybody was sort of gun shy and not sure what the new industry standard was in terms of how many shows we were going to order, what the budgets were going to look like. So it was just this like stasis. So basically, a long way of saying not making money for an entire year. Obviously, that affects people's lives in a very big way. I'm a little I've struggled with it tremendously financially, and I'm even one of the lucky ones. Like, I don't have any kids. I don't, I'm not a homeowner. So people for whom that is the case, that stress is amplified tremendously. So everybody's just like, we want to get back to work, and we're still now having issues, making that happen, like actually creating stuff. So yeah, I would say it was a friend of mine described it the other day as a perfect storm, because that strike stopped work as those companies, the studios and networks, were already starting to sort of reimagine what the nature of the industry would be. So like those two things came together at the same time, and now nobody knows what the hell is going on. So our industry is in a bit of disarray, I would say, at the moment. I guess the more optimistic way to look at it was that we're in a rebuilding phase. But I think, I have a good friend who's the head of a major studio, not the head, but like, higher up at a major studio, and one who's a higher up at a production company. And they're saying like things are getting started again. Like the wheels are starting to turn again. People are starting to be more interested in buying things. It just hasn't trickled down yet to writers, to actors, to crew members, that kind of thing. And there might be another strike. So the Teamsters and IATSE, they might potentially go on strike this summer, if their contract isn't renewed with the AMTPT in a way that satisfies them. So we could be right back into the same situation in a few months, which I'm really hoping doesn't happen.
Wow, that's not good news to hear. And you talk about the business model and the business plan being affected. In addition to that, there's also the consistent struggle, I think, within the industry that you guys deal with regarding unauthorized streaming and piracy. How have those things affected the business model in today's, film and television world for writers?
I mean, piracy has always been an issue. So, like, we all grew up seeing people sell bootleg VHSs and DVDs on street corners and stuff. So, like, that's always been an issue. And obviously, if you're caught doing that by the right people, they will prosecute you pretty intensely. But the problem with that is, the money that you have taken, the money that a pirate has taken from uh, creatives, like, we don't get that money back. You know what I mean? Like, even if the studios sue those people for, 100 or a couple $100,000, they're not going to see that money, because if you're bootlegging videos, you probably don't have a couple $100,000 sitting around at home. And even if they are able to extract money out of those people, that money never finds its way back to us creatives. So that's always been an issue. It's a little easier to curb now, with, because technology, it's easier to kind of shut off things here and there. I know Netflix and Hulu and a lot of the bigger streamers have really cracked down on password sharing, and, limiting the number of appliances. Is that the right word? Of limiting the number uh, computers or cell phones or iPads or whatever that one account can have access to. So they're trying to crack down on that, because then if people are sharing passwords, if there's piracy, then there's even a less accurate accounting of how many people are watching these things, and so they have less information to know how to charge, what to charge advertisers, what to charge subscribers, and that gives them less information about who's watching stuff. So it's less information that they have to generate residuals to pay us. So everybody, it hurts everybody, is the point.
I think you hit on some major points within that response, right? Specifically, regarding how this piracy hurts, you as a whole, as a content creator. As a content creator, can you talk a little bit about how much, data analytics or audience insights actually goes into, the content that you try to drive out and create and build?
So for me personally, it doesn't affect it at all, because I don't chase the market.
Right.
I write whatever is inspiring me at the time, or whatever I think needs to be put out there into the world, or whatever's just on my heart at any moment, or whatever's exciting to me. So, like, if where that comes in is, like, I'll make a thing. Let's say I'll shoot a pilot, and the studio will have a data analytics company, or like a media, an audience analytics company that will test market it. And literally, like, they'll find some people. It's usually in Las Vegas for some reason, but they'll find a group of people, put them in a room, and, like, put dials in front of them where you can turn to one side if you're liking what you're seeing, and turn to the other side if you don't like what you're seeing. And they'll watch my pilot and just mess with the dial based on how they're feeling. And then the company can then analyze that data and be like, so people liked it when this character spoke, but they didn't like it when this character spoke, or they liked when this happened and they didn't like when that happened. So that then they'll give notes back to me based on that, and have me sort of fix what my product is based on what that data brought in. which I think is a flawed system because it like you're not there's no accounting for the taste of the people who are who are assessing my work. Like for the people that they bring in from off the street to show the work, like, they might not be fans of comedy, they might not be fans of my style of comedy, they might not, you know, be people who are super savvy media consumers at all. So we're basing it from off of people who, you know, are kind of just randomly chosen. So I think that is a bit of an antiquated way. I think one of the decent things about social media is that we are able to collect that more data in a more like direct way. So you can check how much chatter there is about your project out on social media very easily with, you know, with hashtags, or, you know, with just like they have people who will monitor social media to see how much they're talking about this project, and then that will give them an idea of a tracking, which means like how well they think it's going to perform at the box office, or B, just reaction to it. What are people thinking after they watch it? So social, that's a much more democratized way to gather that same sort of information, and it's also it's a more of a self-selecting sample of viewer, because that's somebody who has sought out your product, viewed that product, and then commented on that product, versus been roped in, you know, taken inside taken inside a room and sat down to watch something that they may have no interest in. So yeah, so you know, with all social media's ills, that is one good thing that it allows for us as creatives to get direct feedback from our audiences.
Right. No, I think that's amazing. And on a social media topic and technology in general, um, any industry you look at, right, across the board, there's been a rise in the increasing use of artificial intelligence, and specifically in this particular entertainment industry, a rise in not only artificial intelligence, but deepfake technology. Do you see any ethical concerns with the rise in these?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's an existential threat. Like it's a giant deal. So like that's another big thing that the strikes were fighting against, was the use of AI, because that if computers are generating you know, scripts, then they're not hiring writers to generate scripts. If AI is can make actors do things on screen, then you don't need to hire those actors to do things on the screen. They make them up. And so it is a direct threat to our existence as creatives, and that's what we've been trying to curb. So, you know, there were AI protections put in to the deals that eventually were made after the strikes. You know, the deals that were made that allowed the strikes to stop. So we do have some protections in place. And I think some people who are not super forward thinking are like, they, you know, AI is never going to be able to replace writers or actors, because the technology is not there yet. And I'm like, the technology is not there yet today, but like the speed at which all technology is advancing, 8 months from now, 12 months from now, 15 months from now, that it could be good enough to generate a script. Now there's a legal, back to your first question about intellectual property, there is a conflict there, because what AI does is you basically feed all the scripts that have ever been written into AI, and then AI spits out whatever you know, you type in, oh, I want to write a movie about lions on the Sahara, whatever. And so like then the makers of the Lion King can sue and be like, well, you fed our movie into that AI's brain. AI regurgitated some version of my movie, so that's my intellectual property was ripped off. Sarah Silverman actually sued some AI company for putting out. So they were doing a comedian set, and some of that had been derived from her work. So there's like that. It's again direct existential threat to our industry. If it's allowed to proliferate unchecked, we're done. You know, and I did see when we were on the picket lines, one of my favorite signs that I saw was no AI ever had a bad childhood. And so I thought, I mean, that's a strong argument for why humans are needed in order to tell stories, because unless AI is out there walking around in the world, they're not experiencing the same things that humans are experiencing that inspire us to write and create these things.
Wow, that was an amazing response. Technology is definitely among us. And, we definitely have to figure out a way to work with it and ensure it's not working against us or hurting us in the long run. But we really just like to thank you, Chuck, for coming and joining us in this conversation today. You dropped a whole lot of gems, stuff that's like making me think about, the writing industry, the entertainment industry, and how these things are intersecting for the better and for the worse. So thank you so much for joining us today. We were happy to have you. And audience, thank you for watching this episode of Culturally and Technically Legal, where we examine intersections of culture, law, and technology. We were blessed to have Chuck on today and just give us a lot of great insight and information. Look forward to the next episodes coming up. Thank you.